Hey there, Improvement Nerds. Welcome back to the Improvement Nerd Podcast, the place where we nerd out on all things improvement, leadership, and creating meaningful change. In our last episode, we kicked off a conversation about the powerful methodology of training within industry, or TWI. Today, we're double-clicking on one specific component of TWI that truly stands out, job relations. And who better to guide us through this focused discussion than Thomas Schmidt, a TWI expert whose insights and passion for unlocking human potential are nothing short of inspiring. In this episode, we'll explore how job relations builds trust, strengthens leadership, and transforms how teams engage with change. If you're curious about how relationships drive continuous improvement and fuel innovation, then this episode is for you. So buckle up, nerds, as we double-click on job relations and continue to wage war on bad processes, one relationship at a time. April, thank you for joining us today on our Improvement Nerd Podcast. We are honored to have you on. We first met, I was working at an organization, and we were looking into a training methodology to implement within our company, and I had some familiarity with training within industry in the past, and I saw that you were an expert in TWI, so just reached out to you for your thoughts and assistance with TWI. And in our conversation together, I was just blown away by you and your knowledge of TWI, and specifically one component of TWI, which is job relations. So I think for our audience, we need to revisit and maybe back up a little bit to what is training within industry. Would you mind giving us a high-level overview of what TWI is?
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for inviting me to be a part of the podcast. I'm really excited. And while I like all of the training within industry programs, job relations is my favorite, and I don't keep that as a well-kept secret either. Training within industry has a fairly lengthy history. It started back in 1940. It was introduced as part of a National Defense Advisory Commission in terms of looking at World War II, and they knew that they were going to need to be skilling up and training individuals to be able to help with wartime production. And so the training within industry programs became part of the War Production Board and eventually the War Manpower Commission, starting back in 1942. And eventually it became part of the Bureau of Training. And so TWI, or training within industry, has different modules that are part of it. So there's job instruction, job methods, job relations, and there's also a program development and problem solving that are a part of that. But as I said, job relations is my favorite. And really because we know, whether we're talking about in the 1940s or today, work gets done and accomplished through people and because of people. And that's one of the things that I really fell in love when I started learning about Lean and Six Sigma and continuous improvement. It was this way that I could really tap into people's talent and how to leverage that better. So from my perspective, I like looking at how can we eliminate under and unutilized human talent. And for me, job relations is one of those ways that we can help to leverage making the best use of people's time, but especially their talent. And as a supervisor, a lot of times it comes down to helping to build those relations with people, to get to know them and to be able to help pull that team together.
That's great. I love it because you're nerding out on the same things that we nerd out about with the Green Dot Group. People will bring us into their organization to help make change, and we know that change only comes through people. So we have a very people-centered approach to instituting change. And it sounds like the JR portion of the TWI is centered on that. So it sounds like you're very passionate about that piece of it, just as we are. What are some challenges that job relations can help solve for an organization if they apply it appropriately?
Yeah, I think one of the things to first highlight is job relations. We're focusing, and the purpose and intent is to provide managers and supervisors with a skill of leadership. And job relations is the tool to be able to help them build that skill of leadership. So the things that we cover and talk about in job relations is, first and foremost to me, is the foundations of good relations. There's 4 of them. We talk about, how do you let each employee know how they're doing and how they're getting along? How do you give them credit when it's due? How do you tell employees in advance about changes that are going to affect them and make the best use of each person's ability? So we talk about those foundations, and then we move into 4 steps for how to solve problems when they do come up. Because anytime you get 2 or more people in a room and employees working together, challenges are bound to come up. And so we talk about step 1 is we want to be able to get the facts. Step 2, we want to make sure we weigh and decide those. Step 3, taking action. And step 4, checking those results. The things we focus on, again, are we want people to know that people must be treated as individuals, right? There's not a cookie cutter way to be able to do that. We want to treat, as we talked about, that person-centered approach, right? Getting to know people as individuals, treating them as individuals is critical. So when we think about job relations in continuous improvement, especially, how do you tell people in advance of those changes that are going to impact them? Because as individuals who oftentimes facilitate and lead change, that innovation is exciting. Bringing about something new is exciting. But for those people doing the work, isn't that as exciting? So that's where it becomes critically important to engage people in the work, have them be a part of those discussions and conversations so that they're included in a part of that work. Job relations helps us be able to build those skills in anticipating and when challenges may come up. So when we start talking about problems or challenges that companies might face, I'm anticipating, for those listening, there's been a time where they've tried to implement a change and they have come into resistance, right? Depending on what industry, you might say resistance, non-compliance, non-adherence. And so when we think about job relations, it helps supervisors build those skills and those relationships between supervisors and employees, having some of those conversations. When you let individuals know how they're doing, right, that helps to open that door for dialogue as well. When we tell people about changes in advance are going to infect them, it gives us an opportunity again for that dialogue to be able to say, one of my favorite phrases is, what questions do you have? What concerns do you have? Because when change happens, many times we have stories that we start telling ourselves about what might be next. And so job relations can help us in engaging in some of those conversations.
As I think through what you're talking about and how job relations can help us through change, whether you're using Lean Six Sigma or some other type of change model, you go through the change stages of forming, storming, norming, performing, and joining. With JR, is there an appropriate time to begin or appropriate phase to implement JR, or do you apply JR all the way through the change and have it just be a part of your culture?
Yeah, so job relations, I think, helps to operationalize that culture of continuous improvement, the behaviors that we want to see leaders be able to engage in, because we know continuous improvement is oftentimes a part of every organization or the work that they need to do to be able to stay competitive and to be able to thrive and grow. Job relations becomes it becomes the habit. It becomes, how do you interact as a person, as a leader, as a supervisor, as a manager, working with individuals. So it's not something that you do just while a project is going on, but it becomes the way that you act, the way that you behave and interact and engage.
That's great. Love that. We like to say that the work is the people. A lot of times we approach work and say, the work is the process, how we do stuff, or the outcomes we get. Our approach is the work is the people. If we can transform the people and get them to look at their processes and then transform those, then we're doing a pretty good job. So for me personally, it's interesting when you go into a new area and you're going to have some early adopters, late adopters, and laggards, and you just have some people that are just resistant. And I feel like that's where the JR portion really is a great approach to have within your culture. Personally, I'm just thinking back to some challenges that I've had early in change management at different organizations with different people. And there's a lot of times success stories to where we feel like, this person or this group of people might delay our project or cause us some fits or speed bumps. And it turns out when you apply JR or you have those conversations with people, if you bring them in and have them be a part of the change, sometimes there's a great turnaround with them and they end up becoming champions or the ones that are out front and leading the change. I can think of someone that was a resistor to change just because they've been jaded by change attempts in the past. And it was not a tool in the toolbox of Lean Six Sigma or anything else that changed his mind, but it was the relationship building with that person and garnering trust with that person that helped to open the door for them to even begin to look and see what it is that we were doing. And this was an operator who now has been promoted into a leadership position, which is just outstanding because they totally did a 180. And that 180 occurred not because of a tool, but because of the relationships that were built. So when we see transformations like that in people, for me, and I think for all of us at the Green Dot Group, we just get super jazzed up about that, even more so than when we're increasing quality or reducing time or saving costs somewhere. But I do imagine, though, there are some positive outcomes for organizations that implement job relations. And I don't know if you've come across any of those in the past to where maybe some hard costs or hard savings were born out of implementing job relations or building relationships with people who do the work.
So I think a couple of things. I love the story that you shared with your team member because many times continuous improvement efforts have been tried at companies and have ran into maybe some speed bumps or potholes that have led to maybe things not going as intended. And there can be grief that takes place with that. It becomes a part of the change management when their experience is their truth. And so many times when we talk with individuals and we engage with them and we find out that maybe they're more hesitant to accept change, there might be some continuous improvement trauma or grief that's taken place in the past where things maybe didn't go as well. And that's going to be that when we take that person-centered approach, that's meeting them where they're at. They've had a negative experience with a continuous improvement implementation. And so that's where we have to start at. And as you pointed out very eloquently, we have to work to build that trust bank with that person and to be able to help navigate through that uncertainty and that hesitation because their behavior, that resistance, it's nonverbal communication. It's saying, yeah, I'm not quite on board with this. I've got some hesitation. And so it's awesome as a supervisor that you see that to be able to then have that conversation and engage in that, to be able to find out more, what do we need to do to be able to help understand the concerns that they maybe have to want to move forward. For job relations, that's where when we talk about the 4-step problem solving method, that's in step 1 in getting facts. So that's where that gives us that opportunity to talk with individuals that are concerned, to get their feelings and opinions and to be able to find out, that past. Where we've seen some more hard numbers in terms of return on investment, turnover. When you have when you have supervisors who are working with team members to help them learn their roles, to be able to help them become engaged, involved, that can help reduce your turnover. We know one of the biggest reasons that people still leave jobs is because of their immediate supervisor. So when you have a supervisor who's got really good people skills and problem solving skills and helping their team members grow, you can see, as I said, a reduction in your turnover. It also may help companies when we start looking at maybe regulatory or compliance challenges that they need to be working on implementing, being able to get the team and engaged and involved with that. Being able to even do surveys. When you think of just like a quick pulse survey, real-time survey, a couple of questions, you'll be able to start to see that morale of people change. And when you start asking your employees how many of them would recommend others work there, and you start to see that number change, that's an indicator that you can start to quantify. You can also ask supervisors, managers, human resource leaders, how much of their time is being spent working with managers and supervisors and maybe troubleshooting some things versus their time being able to be repurposed to other things because now their supervisors have the skills to be able to address some of the challenges.
I sometimes wonder, As you said, TWI has been around since the 1940s, and it's a proven methodology for training. I just wonder why more companies don't use or utilize TWI to have better training, yield better quality, train people quicker, faster, less need for retraining. So, why companies don't just do this, besides myself on it, I really don't know. But even more importantly, like why organizations don't invest in building relationships or seeing the need for building connectivity with the operators on the front line or with each other, even within peer groups. And that is just so important for organizations to be able to move forward. And it seems like it's just so obvious and right in our face that I'm just left wondering why more companies, if not all companies, just don't do it. I was just wondering, JR kind of nests within TWI along with JI, job instruction and job methods. Can you, and I think I know the answer to this, can you apply JR separate and apart from TWI?
Well, each of those, I think of them as being modules. So you can offer job relations training without offering job instruction or job methods training. There's no real kind of right or wrong module of which to start with. I own my bias, and I would say you want to start with job relations because you want to have the leadership skills in terms of, as we talked about, the foundations for good relations and how do you solve problems. You want to make sure that your team members and your supervisors, managers have those skills and they're operating from that same standard before you start to really kind of maybe embark more on a job methods journey where that focus is more on continuous improvement and Kaizen, and we focus on tasks. And is there a way to combine, eliminate, or rearrange the work to make it more efficient? So you're using your people's time and talent better. Job instruction, we're getting to how do you create standard job instructions? How do you train people to do the work according to that standard? Both job methods and job instruction, you need to have your employees engaged and on board. But if they don't have good relations with their supervisor or their manager, if there's not a strong sense of trust and commitment within the organization and a culture that allows them to live out continuous improvement and shows that respect for people component, it's going to be really difficult to get them engaged and on board. So I would say if you're going to implement, start with job relations first, then you can move into job methods, job instruction.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Building the relationships is fundamental. If we don't do that, we're not going to farm ideas from the frontline staff, and maybe the frontline staff may not feel comfortable or hold on to their ideas or think that they're not great ideas to bring forward and not feel safe enough to express those. So building that base level of trust is super important.
Yeah, it makes me think about, for anybody who's read Patrick Lencioni's book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, right? The base foundation is you need to have trust.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I see especially when I teach job relations and how the content is set up, is we focus a lot at first on using the 4-step method to solve problems, to be able to help show if good relations were used, how many problems could be avoided. We can't avoid all problems. We can't completely eliminate them, but we're able to reduce them. And so over time, one of those things that's maybe a little bit more of a softer indicator is job relations being utilized. Is it being used at the company? Is it being lived out? Is that you should start to see that heavy use of the 4-step problem solving method over time go down, because if those trained in job relations are using it and living it out, you'll see that the foundations for good relations are being used and lived out and have become part of their daily, maybe leader standard work and their habits. You'll start to see that in terms of being able to see where is a company at if they are implementing job relations in that cultural shift. Initially, you'd see high use of the 4-step problem solving method. lower use of the good foundations because they're starting just to get them in place. But over time, you should start to see that become the in-person flip where, again, if you ask, and just in a quick pulse survey to individuals about, does your supervisor let you know how they're doing? Do you get credit when due? Are you informed in advance of changes? You should start to see those answers maybe change over time, but you should be able to see those behaviors in these quick pulse surveys in terms of being able to get feedback in real time about the behaviors.
So within TWI, you have the JR, JM, JI, the job relations, the job methods, job instructions. Which do you feel like is the harder lift to get going and to maintain?
I would say with job relations, it is more difficult because it requires changes in people's behaviors. And we know behavioral change can be difficult for people to adopt changes in how they address problems, how they maybe interact or engage with individuals. So I think from that perspective, job relations can take a little bit longer to see some return on investment or see those cultural shifts and changes, because just like when we think of 5S, the most difficult part of it is the sustain piece.
Mhm.
The same thing can be applied in job relations, in that in order to create that cultural shift and to have those foundations for good relations become habit, you have to set aside time almost to practice it and to make it part of a habit so that it moves from being something that feels maybe uncomfortable or not something that the individuals, how they respond normally, that it shifts over time to being just the natural way for how they go about as a leader.
Yeah, I would imagine that is the case, right? Because if you are trained to do something in your vocation one way, and then you're trained to do it a different way, you haven't been living that your whole life. So to unwind and relearn a different way is difficult, but probably not as difficult as changing paradigms that have existed in someone's head probably since they were a little kid, right? And they carry that along with them. And you're fundamentally just changing the way they think, how they interact with others in order to provide a better way to approach work. So it's a heavier lift. I can see that.
And I think some of it depends too on workplaces where individuals are. And for individuals who have aspirations to maybe move up into higher level leadership roles, what are the things that are being looked at to be able to determine that someone has the skills to be able to move up? For some individuals, depending on what they observe as the people who are getting promoted, and they're going to look back at what are those successes and accomplishments. And if their achievements in terms of promoting people are helping them grow or coaching them, or even looking at how many people they've been able to reduce turnover, as we talked about, what are their ratings as a supervisor, those are kinds of things that send a message about who's getting promoted and why are they getting promoted. And if people don't see that those with really good job relation skills or have an understanding of what it takes to get promoted, if they don't see those things being highlighted, it may make it difficult for some individuals to want to engage with job relations.
As I think back on it, the last place I was at, the State of the Union there was that they had an over 50% turnover rate when I got there. And most of the hires were outside hires that came in to leadership. And during my tenure there, I think we promoted 6 to 8 people within operations, and they were all internal promotions. So we're investing in the people that were doing the work and building them up and promoting them into positions. And we didn't have a singular outside hire into operations. Not that that's never necessary, because of course you want fresh eyes and different ideas and diversity of thought to come in, but we did a lot of heavy promoting from within, and our attrition rate went from 50% down, I think, to around 20%. So there was a definite difference in just in investing in the people, and it really jazzed up the folks that wanted to grow. So a lot of people in that industry feel like they've hit a ceiling because they're the best operator they can possibly be in maybe their workstation or a cell or a couple different work cells. But when they start to see their peers being promoted because of some of the soft skill sets that we talked about being developed, that just is so contagious. People see that and want that. It creates a better environment, and it creates a more stable environment for operations in our case, because when you have that much attrition, you have a bunch of organizational knowledge loss, and you're just spending so much money in sourcing people and onboarding people and training new folks.
And I'm going to extract, Mark, because you didn't even realize this as you were talking. So you talked about it in what you just shared. I'm going to pull out 2 foundations for good relations. When you let each employee know how they're doing, that allows for that dialogue to be able to give them real-time feedback to be able to improve. It also allows you to be able to help do some conversation and goal setting. And then when we think about the 4th foundation is make the best use of each person's ability. Look for an ability not now being used, and never stand in an employee's way, right? Those are 2 bullet points underneath make the best use of each person's ability. So what I heard you say and what you shared was being able to know who wants to grow more. What skills and talents do they have that we're not yet tapping and leveraging to not only help them grow, but to be able to help the company grow as well, and being able to really leverage that. Because I always felt in a supervisory role, my goal was to be able to get to know who my employees were and find out where they wanted to go, and to be able to help them get there, and to be able to find opportunities that would help meet some of the experiences or skill growth that they needed to be able to move up. One of the things you highlighted really well was it takes time to build that relationship and rapport with employees. It is not something most times, right? I explain this when I teach job relations. It is that trust account between an employee and a supervisor often starts at 0. And as a supervisor, as a manager, as a leader, your actions and your behaviors need to align to start putting some deposits into that trust account. Because when you have to share information that maybe feels challenging, or you have to provide some developmental and growth feedback, you want individuals to trust that that's coming from a place of kindness and from a place where you really do have their best interests at heart to help them to be able to grow. But individuals aren't going to share most times personal things, hard things, if they don't trust you or they don't know you, unless maybe it's something that's at a critical or crisis situation. But when you can work to have those relations, when there are challenges that come up, employees are going to be more likely to talk with you about it. And some of the things we know from incoming workforce, they want to have work that feels meaningful to them. They want to be engaged, and the company and how they support community and live out mission is critically important.
Absolutely. Wow. Is there anything that you would like me to touch on? Is there anything about you that you would like to share with the Improvement Nerd audience?
Yeah, so I would share that I am absolutely passionate and zealous about helping organizations become unstoppable through developing their talent. And I fundamentally believe that eliminating underutilized human talent and unutilized human talent is really where competitive advantage lies for companies. That's where we get to help unlock innovation and creativity and help companies become a place where employees just not only thrive, but they feel engaged, right? And that's really, to me, kind of where the magic comes from.
Nice. Thank you for that. That's going to be the highlight. So I could see that snippet going right onto the LinkedIn post with the captions going. So that's perfect. Thank you for that one. Well, I'm really glad to have gotten to know you even better and to have bonded over TWI broadly and JR more specifically, and sure hope that we can have more discussions. So thanks again for being on the Improvement Nerds podcast.
You're welcome. Great to be here and chat today.
And that's a wrap, Improvement Nerds. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into job relations with April. Her insights into how relationships drive continuous improvement remind us that real change starts with people. If today's episode sparked some ideas or left you wanting more, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, or your own improvement stories. And as always, until next time, keep nerding out, keep improving, and leave your processes better than you found them.